Right, well, thank you so much, everyone, for just inviting me here. It's such an exciting initiative that you've started in this part of the world, and there's so much potential for AI, of course, to participate in this as well. And, I just felt sometimes I get a bit tired of people always saying, okay, well, I know that you're making this little tool, but why don't you just throw it into ChatGPT, right? And increasingly, this is the answer to everyone saying, okay, but yeah, we can make this tool, but couldn't we just use ChatGPT, right? And this kind of fallback is something that I think that we can do better with, right? And I want to know first, to start in the spirit of participation, I thought I'd first make you participate and do a little poll to understand what the feeling in the room is. And I want your honest opinion, right? It's about open models versus closed models. And to explain what those are, if you don't know, open models are obviously those that are open, that you can download, you can retrain them. They're smaller, obviously, something like DeepSeek, you might have heard, Llama, that was released by Meta, but there's a lot of academic initiatives as well. And the closed ones are obviously the proprietary models like ChatGPT, Claude, and big, massive scale models that are coming from these multi-billion-dollar companies. And I'd like to know, how do you trust these to be used for very high-stakes decisions like clinical practice in low-resource settings? So, for instance, do you think that actually, it's kind of like a hippie versus capitalist kind of a thing here? Which side are you, right? You don't have to wear a flowing gown to participate. But do you actually think that closed models now, they're just too good? They're actually much more trustworthy. They just have better performance, right? It's much more important than the potential bias that could come in with profit-based things. Or do you think that they're actually much less trustworthy? Do you think that maybe they have got a very important conflict of interest concern and we should be worried about this? Or do you think we're kind of at the cusp? Now's the time. We should maybe make a decision about whether we want to invest in open models or not. Let's have a look how many hippies are in the room. Let's go for it. Show the results. And we have a very mixed audience. Very interesting, right? We have about 42% of people in this room are hippies, right? And they think that closed is much less trustworthy. But a good percentage of people here, 30%, think that actually we should just go ahead with the closed models. They're probably better. They have better performance. I use ChatGPT for everything as well. It knows everything about me. And even when I abuse it, I don't know if you do the same, but I abuse it, basically typing with my elbows, it still understands me, right? I speak in my own language, it still understands me. So can we do this with open models yet? And what is our hope? So this is the theme of the talk, which I'll go back to now. And I'd like us to take a moment to consider participatory AI. How do we make sure that we actually don't have to rely on these massive scale, multi-billion-dollar companies? How can we make sure that we actually take the people? These are some of the patients that I was seeing when I was volunteering in South Africa. How do we get their voice into these tools? And how do we make sure that there isn't this narrative when people look at images like this and others taken from places where I was working before, in places clearly they're going with those sticks on their head. Where are they going? To build fires because there's no electricity, right? Here, no running water. How can you run AI in places with no electricity? Usually you need these massive scale data centers and that eat up whole lakes of water. How can you reconcile these images, volatile settings in Ebola and other places with AI? How do we represent them? That's usually the question that is going to be asked. How do we represent these people? But I'd like us to really be a little bit more nuanced about this question. It's not about how we represent them, but rather about how they can represent themselves. How can we ensure that they have an opportunity to represent themselves in a rigorous way, in a way that is done fairly, that they are compensated for their efforts of representing themselves, that they're compensated for the ownership of their data? So usually the answer was, let's just get the data, right? Let's just take the data and make sure that we can just train on it. So let's see how this worked before. And I've got Ebola is on my mind at the moment. I was there in 2014, and now it's come back with a vengeance in DRC. And I just remembered that this is actually the whole reason why I started my journey in AI. Back in 2014, when I was there, it was really scary, right? It wasn't like COVID. 80% to 90% death rates. We still didn't know how it was vectored. There were all sorts of rumors going around. Is it spread in an insect? It was really, really visceral to see the results of Ebola in your colleagues, and also just it was everywhere. You open a door and it was very visceral. And so we really didn't know how it worked. And you'd think, at least, that people would want to collaborate and share their data to understand it better. And I was very disappointed that when I started asking people to share their data in this big repository, not just me, it was a big consortium, I sometimes got answers like, yeah, but I'm got this like Lancet review that I'm just going to submit, and I just don't want to be scooped beforehand. So just like 2 months, just wait, right? And this was genuinely the response that I was getting from people who were trying to collect data and publish papers. They still didn't want to share their data. This idea of building a big centralized repository, there was one from, for instance, IDDO from Oxford with really wonderful collaborators there. And I was the first person to receive the data that came out of this initiative. And it took them 6 years, right? By that time, it was completely useless and we couldn't even use it. So why don't we do this? Why don't we just all share our data? It's become easier than possible. Control-C, Control-V, there's all these different places and ways to do it. Why doesn't everyone just do this, right? It's easy, okay? And the truth is that we don't share data for a range of very well-considered reasons. It's not just being like a bad person, okay? There's a lot of reasons why they don't do it. And in this case, for instance, when we have this kind of status quo of copy-paste centralized learning for AI, it doesn't work because, for instance, here you've got, let's say, just like schematic diagram here, you've got a whole lot of different users in different places or different like data collectors. Collecting more or less the same data. This will be in different like Ebola treatment centers, for example. They're collecting the same data, and now you are asking them, please just, do this Control-C, Control-V, make sure your data is private, that's all you have to do, and you hope that that's the case, and then just copy and paste it to the centralized server, right? And this is the place where the model will be, and you train it. Okay, it sounds easy. But the thing is that this creates obviously a loss of ownership. I'm saying the obvious, but let's just schematically put it out here, right? And it means that only one person is really winning here. Everyone else is losing. They're losing a lot of things. They're losing intellectual property. And they're losing time. It's really laborious to prepare the data like this. And they're losing a lot of time because there's a huge privacy risk, because actually privacy is something that degrades over time. And if we share our data in a central repository, with the increasing ability for us to re-identify data with increasingly powerful models, it's not actually guaranteed. So it's a risk for them as well. They don't want to do bad to their patients. They want to make sure that they're protecting that data. And what happens is that some places just then can't share data and it becomes unrepresentative. And this just doesn't work. And it hasn't worked over and over again. Sharing data is hard. Now, this is not an intractable problem. There are certain things that we can do to make sure that we can actually learn from data that we don't share. And we make a range of tools that are participatory tools, and this will be the first one of them that I'm showing you. I just want to dive in quickly. But there are ways that we can actually build scaffolds for people to collaborate better and to ensure that we don't have to give up our ownership and our control over our data and over our ideas and over our patients' safety and validity of our models. There are ways to do this. This is one of them, right? So just one of them, this is federated learning. Who here has heard about federated learning? Yeah, okay, so there's quite a few people who haven't. So just for those who haven't, first of all, everyone wins in federated learning. You don't have to share any original data, okay? All the data can stay with you, and instead of sharing the model or like the data to the source of the model, you're sharing the model, as you saw over here, to the source of the data, and you're decentralizing the learning. It retains ownership, right? So everyone is winning, including the server, the person orchestrating this, because they get the data. You have shared intellectual property with the model, but no data is shared. And then it's also much less laborious. It's not like effort-free, okay? Humans still have some sort of role in society, okay? We do have to work. And there's a reduced privacy risk. It's not completely gone, but there's some reduced privacy risk, which is great. So how this works is that basically the model is training in practice over here on the edge, and then it's just sending these abstract gradients or weight updates to a central server, which then aggregates them. And then that weight update is then sent back to all of the models, and then you provably learn the same model that you would have learned if you shared the data. Right? So it's pretty easy. Like for instance, a model is basically the shape of a line, or like the gradient of it. So if your data says that this line that's separating Ebola positive and negative is 40, and mine says it's 50 degrees, well, then we can average it out. Okay, that's kind of the idea. So these abstract concepts are actually very easy to share, and they're private, and we can actually do this. So this is it's a tool. It's here. There's an app for that. We've made a platform that you can use today. I wanted this to be as pragmatic as possible. It is a completely free, open source, open access tool called Disco, and the rotating disco ball took me longer than the entire platform, and it was worth it. It was worth it. So this is distributed collaborative learning, and you can actually do federated learning, decentralized learning as you prefer, and on any model. So it's use case and model agnostic as well. So if you're interested, you can reach out to me, but I just thought I'd make it pragmatic. There are some bottlenecks here, but the thing is that when you want to kind of correct for this, you might think, okay, this is a great idea. You can even not have a server. You can even be completely decentralized. But it kind of relies on people having compute, right? Decentralized learning means that you are decentralizing the compute. But if you are going to fix this, you're either going to make the model much smaller, because you can't go and do this with a massive scale OpenAI model, right? You're either going to be optimizing things, or you're going to be giving compute to people and actually investing locally. So these are solutions that are benefiting locally. Maybe you don't have a lot of reliable connection. Well, then you're going to optimize the flow, and you're going to do zero-shot learning or something like this. And this is what we've been doing. So these are the things I've been working on. You may have some malicious actors in the loop, because remember, this is like black box data now, because you don't see it. And now, instead of like forcing people to share their data, you can actually rather focus on making better data quality. You can make sure that the models are robust. They are mathematical principles that we can follow here for Byzantine robustness and others. And you're actually making the whole system more robust rather than excluding people that you don't trust. And this trust is then kind of built because you are caring about the actual people that are delivering the data rather than the data itself. So this is just some of the things that we do, and we kind of focused on that second little circle over there, which is called ethical data management. But I'll just go through some of the rest of the loop of what we are doing in our group, and with some clear tools that we can use for each of these as well. And I hope that I'm very happy to have anyone come up to me afterwards if you're interested in participating as well. So, it's participatory AI, so obviously I'm going to invite you to participate. So we make scalable tools, and we try to make them as implementable as possible so they can be used. And we also try to make them provably impactful. So we also have if you start at the top there, we try to prove the impact by running clinical trials as well. And then we make sure that all of those things can be locally owned. So what we're trying to do here, if I just focus in on that little thing in the middle, all the tools that we are trying to make are agnostic to the data. So you can train, for instance, in Disco, any model with any data, right? Or they're also agnostic to the use case. So we try to make sure that if we are making models, that they can be trained with any data in the pipeline is kind of useful to people, right? So Disco is the thing that I just showed you, which is there. And then as an example of what we do for some of our trials to make them as expandable as possible and useful and participatory, is we make not just a trial, but we try to make a platform trial, right? So now we just about finished this, which I won't present today, but it's just the idea and the concept of it, where you rather make a core protocol of a trial, and then you have it so that people are following a certain recipe for evaluating AI models. And then you can expand it with use case appendices to allow you to go to different use cases and different countries. So just kind of building on this participatory concept, where you try to make something as generic as possible as a scaffold for encouraging people to be able to participate in trials, in building models, in evaluating them under their own, with their own interests. And then we collect the data, then we make sure that we don't have to share it. And then over here is where we are actually making the model. So we make a series of models. This one is called Meditron. We also have other ones because it's use case agnostic, for example. So Meditron is for medicine. So it's a LLM, like a ChatGPT for medicine. Small ones, different sizes, different things that you can put in there for instance, multimodal or not. And then also for Legitron, for international humanitarian law, for example. So it's use case agnostic. It's a pipeline to make models. And then we have, once we have the models and we feel that they are good enough to use, we want to prove that they are good enough to use. And so we have this platform called Move, which evaluates any model, any LLM, and it's called Move for a reason because we're trying to move the models, right? So we are moving them into the context that they should be used. And I'll explain this to you today. So Move, it stands for Massive Open Online Validation and Evaluation. And it collects evaluations about how the model is performing in your setting, and then uses those, operationalizes those, and puts it back into the model to make it closer to your setting, allowing people to give feedback and participate in their own model building. And now you might say, well, this is obvious, like RLHF has been existing for a long time. But where do you have any way to control your own RLHF and make your own models? And this is the whole point. It's about trying to give power to people using clear and easy to use tools for themselves. Okay, so starting with, I was just over here. Whoops, I went backwards. So starting over here, I'll just quickly show you what we're doing with Meditron. So Meditron is a suite of open LLMs for medical knowledge, as I said before. And wanting to come back to this concept of open versus closed, but now having a little bit more nuance. So Meditron is obviously an open model, okay? And open is really important for participation. You can have closed models, right? But closed models don't give you any control about, for instance, when they are updated, which is important. Open models allow you to download them, to freeze them, to make sure that you can control when they are updated. They allow you to put them on your own server to make sure that no data goes outside of your hospital, for example. They're smaller, they're easier to control, usually. So here are some examples. Some of you that already know this: Llama, DeepSeek, Gemma. Gemma released some nice new ones with MedGemma, for example, from Google. But some models are actually more open than others. And who here is familiar with the Apertus models? There's a few. Okay, you're going to have to listen to it again, sorry. But Apertus is what we call a fully open model, right? So what is this like? There's a scale of openness. So how open do we have to be to really be participatory? How open do we have to be to ensure that the models are truly scrutable? This is the question. And here, these open weight models, it's what's released. It's like when you release Llama or DeepSeek, all they are releasing is a set of numbers. So if they've learned the word cat, right, it will be the number representing cat. But you won't really know that that's the number representing cat, and you won't know where it got that representation from, right? So you don't know the book that it took it from. If it knows your name, you don't know if it was actually reading your emails. Maybe it was, right? Where did it get that information about you? Was it reading your emails? You don't know. The data is closed, right? So what was it trained on? These models are actually still closed in terms of data. So this is why Apertus, which is this model that was released by a group of professors in Switzerland between ETH Zurich and EPFL, which really set a new standard of principles of openness. And it's the first model of this size to release all the data. And this means that it's extremely scrutable and transparent, releasing the data, the code, the weights, the license, everything. People are able to do this. Now, you might go, okay, that's whatever, you release the data. This is really hard. I was in these conversations, and with the lawyers, you have no idea to release data that you've trained on and to make sure that it's actually not copyright and to make sure that you haven't trained on copyright data. First of all, what a disadvantage. You know, that's where all the good stuff is, right? If you really want to get good data, you want to go and scrape it and get all the illegal stuff. This is what OpenAI and ChatGPT and Claude were doing. They actually just concluded a law case a few months ago where Anthropic was accused of, and they admitted to stealing millions of books and photocopying them, right? So this is what they were doing. So what a disadvantage to train on non-copyright data. So they scraped the internet for these like sites where they knew that you could reuse it. It's called like a robot.txt file that says you can train on my data or don't train on my data. And they respected that and used this. So how does this look? With this huge disadvantage? We take all of these open models, right? And now we can actually make Meditrons out of them. So it's a pipeline. So again, it's that agnostic thing that I was telling you about, trying to make sure that we can use anything that comes out. Because if we just make a model Meditron, next week there'll be a new thing and it'll be better. And how do you keep up, right? So this is also a reason why we're doing this. We can take any of these open models and we can make like an Apertus Meditron, whatever Meditron, right? A Gemma Meditron. And I'll show you some of our results. And then we can take this and make them any size as well. So we've got ones that are small, about 2 billion parameters. That is like the brain size of the model, right? Or bigger, up to about 70 billion. We go up to about 120 or so billion parameters. And just for your interest, right? 1 billion parameters is about the size of a brain of a honeybee, right? In terms of synapses, if you had to make a comparison. And ChatGPT, the first like 3.5 or something like this, or maybe 4, was about the size of a small rodent. Okay, so like a smart rodent, like an erudite rodent, right? But that's how big that model was. So the difference is just massive, 70 billion versus these huge models. So it's actually very difficult to compete, you would think, right? So how this looks is if you've got like closed models, like these are medical models. So Gemini is a Google model that's completely closed. So all of these things that have X's on it, it's like the base model open. So like the Gemini model, the data is closed, the code is closed, the weight is closed. The medical adaptation data, the synthetic data, the code, the weight, the license, you can't use it, it's closed. This is a closed model, okay? So just to remind us. Then we have these open weights models that are then just releasing the weights and sometimes bits and pieces of the data, but normally the weights, right? And then we can take one of those models and we have these partially open models where we took Gemma and then we did a Gemma Meditron and then we release everything that we can right afterwards. So this is now an open license. And then we have a set of models that are fully open where we release everything. Apertus was on a Apertus base and you can just release everything like this, right? So at what disadvantage are we? Because clearly we're not using copyright data. So here you can see that if we look from November 2023 and now going further this way, you can see how the performance on a difficult benchmark called Health Bench Hard, I think. You can see all of the closed models in orange, going from about 32 to about 60 now with 5.5 there as well, GPT 5.5. And then you've got all the ones that are kind of open, which are the llamas and this sort of thing actually chasing very closely. And that's huge, right? This is the 27 billion parameter model from MedGemma, okay? And that is 03 up there. And look how close they are on this really broad health benchmark, a fraction of the size. And when we have the disadvantage of a fully open model with no private data, you can just see the difference is minimal, really, really minimal. So who is telling us that it's impossible for us to make these models? And you know who made these models? I mean, people often say, oh my goodness, that must have been so expensive, like, wow, like you've just, you're fighting against like $1 billion company, like, how do you do it? No, we had one really good PhD student. He was on a fellowship actually, right? Okay. And so, no, we didn't spend any money on that. We got the compute for free, but it would have cost about a few $1,000, right? And we did, all of this stuff over here, it seems pretty complicated, but I think the most important thing that we did was at the bottom was this participatory feedback. So this is all the different kinds of data that's going into our model, right? So the different kinds of data is, you'll see that we've got up here that you might have seen that move vignettes, and then the rest is just like guidelines, and we're getting our doctors actually all of this inputs into the model. You don't have to know what all of these things are, but these are the inputs that are being put into the model, and you'll see that it's guidelines, curated Q&A, the Move platform. It's all participatory data that's going into the model that is actually advising the model how to behave. And so participatory feedback was actually the secret sauce to make sure that these models were doing so well. The Move is about contextualization. It's about answering the question when people are saying, I want my own, right? And this is how we collaboratively contextualize. We have a continuously learning framework where we take any one of our models that people want to test, we put them on our Move platform, and people go and give feedback. And they say, oh, you answered this answer very badly, and this is how you should answer it in the future. And that feedback we operationalize and we improve the model. And I can show you an example. So again, the Move platform is just sitting in this kind of space over here in this overview diagram. But it kind of is answering this question about like, when we have really bad data, because imperfect data creates an imperfect model, you can have a really big model with useless data and sure, might compensate. But when you have a small model, you can't use bad data. And this is how our data looks in low resource settings. Even if we wanted to, so I always tell the story, but I took this photo through a window, and on the, like, I was so proud, actually. It was in South Africa, and I wanted to go inside, and there was this custodian who came and like intercepted me when I was trying to take the photo, and he's like, hey, you don't go in there. And I was really, I stopped and I was like, I'm so proud of my country, like protecting the patient data, protecting patient rights, everyone used to just be able to come in here, I give my Braveheart speech to this guy, encouraging him to protect patient. And he's looking at me perplexed, he goes, no, there's snakes in there, right? So data is unavailable for a range of reasons, okay? And even if we did go in there and photocopied all of this, do we want it? How ambitious do we want to be? Do we just want to repeat some mistakes that may have been made by people who were perhaps not available? Who were the doctors that were there? Were there any doctors there on that day? We need to be more ambitious than our retrospective data, and we need to collect actively and make sure that we are not waiting for this data to appear. We can't go and say, okay, guys, we're not ready yet, we'll come back later. Everyone is using ChatGPT in our clinics, to be clear. We need to make sure that we're integrating this feedback right now, and we're not just letting all of this data go to large-scale companies. So what we are doing is we're taking the best that we can possibly get, even with PubMed, like less than 3% of PubMed represents the African setting. We make as imperfect models as they are, we make them, and then we make sure that we operationalize those evaluations to improve them with the Move, right? And we can do this in a privacy-preserving way as well, and make sure that we can have ownership of those operationalized evaluations, and have this lightweight contextualized versioning so that people can host it locally. We don't need massive models, right? So what are the results? Well, we had some really nice ones. So if you look over here, all the green stuff is good, okay? And that's our stuff. So if you like, I'm just like summarizing it, okay? So basically, if you have a base model over here, which is like the open Meditron, so this is Meditron fully open, you can see that when we actually put the data from the participatory feedback, it is preferred enormously compared to the base model. This is with like LLM as judge, as well as other benchmarks that we used as well, right? So this is the trend here is that it works. Your feedback would work. And interestingly, for Gemma versus MedGemma, right, there's almost no difference. This is from Google. So it's their big thing is like Gemma versus MedGemma. And then we did the same thing. And actually, there's not much of a difference between Gemma and MedGemma. It's preferred 34% of the time. But when we do our mix of participatory feedback on the Gemma model, you can actually see how much better it gets. And our Gemma model, our MedGemma model is really preferred much more because we've got that secret sauce of people's participation, of their preferences. And it's such valuable data. It's such valuable data, and it's especially valuable for open models. So the difference between Gemma, right? It was a very well-trained model. It's from Google, right? So this is the red. Right? And when we make Gemma Meditron, the difference is kind of small. It doesn't have a lot of space. It's a little bit saturated. But with open models, you can see there's a big difference between a Pertus and a Pertus Meditron. And so this means that we really do have to, if we want to make these models that are fully open and fair better, we actually do have to do the work and collect this participatory feedback. And it's not just us that values it, right? People value it massively. There's enterprise agreements here that, that protect people's data when you're using OpenAI and others. And this kind of says that we do not use your data to train our foundation model. And they go, okay, it's cool. It's fine. I'm going to use ChatGPT in my hospital, which is now massively rolling out across Africa, for example, with these like bring your own credits kind of initiatives where the large scale corporations say, we're going to give you credits out of the goodness of our hearts. We're going to give you credits, and then you can just integrate massively into your EHR systems, and we'll even give you some engineers, right? And that's we're just being kind, right? Because we're bringing our own buckets, so please just fill them, right? So this is what's happening, and then they say, oh, but we don't train on your data, unless, right? Unless what? Unless, okay, so it is explicitly protected. The inputs and outputs and user content is protected from foundation model training. But what they can improve is non-foundation model, right? Because they only protect the foundation model. And there's so many things that go into a wrapper of how these models work. There's so many other models, prompting models, routing models, safety systems, classifiers, re-rankers, a whole lot of other things that scaffold the foundation complex that can learn from this data and that are not explicitly protected. And there's a whole lot of things that are much more valuable. And it's the stuff that we were trading on when we are doing this. It's called operational learning. It's what we termed as operational learning. It's about feedback. It's about preferences. It's about usage signals. It's about corrections. And this kind of stuff is the stuff that's really the secret sauce of model training. And so this is what they can train on. And as soon as you give a thumbs up, thumbs down, all of this data that is protected becomes unprotected and can be used. So this is important that we protect this. And as I finish with my last slides, because I'm getting the stare, right? So as I finish with my last slides, I will skip ahead, I promise, and I'll say that what we are trying to do here is trying to better represent our context, right? So Move is successful with our partners because it respects their ownership, has community alignment. We want to make sure that we can co-create these models together and have expert validation so that they can be accountable and transparent with public oversight. There can be dynamic and updatable continuous learning to make sure that we always respond to the changing environments, and we can adapt them to ensure representative evaluation. We have a lot of people using these tools, have over 20,000 experts now. It's more than 300,000 evaluations. People want to have a voice. And you know how much we have to pay the people doing this? Nothing. We're not getting a profit, and they're getting a model. Academia has got such an important role, and in like collaborations like this are so powerful. We are huge. Like, we're not some startup, you know? Startups come and go. Academia has been around forever. And we actually do have to, I hate to be cliche and say, come together, kumbaya, let's hold hands. But it's true that actually if you do collaborate just a little bit more strategically, you can make really, really competitive tools at a massive scale, and it is very tangible to do this. So we see it, we see that it works, people do like it, and it's fun, right? And I think that's it's really something that we can do for different use cases as well. So if you have any ideas, please feel free to reach out to me as well about that. Okay, thank you. Sorry.